CPAC. Okay, we don't have a ton of time up here, so here's what I want to do. I want to try to frame this by keeping on this focus. There's all this big tech out there, social media, clearly posing a lot of big problems and challenges. How do we as conservatives go about fixing it? So that's how I want to kind of think about this, all right? So you've spent a lot of time in your time as an attorney general, and now you're here in D.C. Yeah. What in your time in terms of Google, Twitter, Facebook, all that interaction, do you think are the 2 or 3 biggest problems?
Well, first of all, it's great to be with you, Kim. This is a lot of fun. Thanks for having us. Thanks for having us, CPAC. It's great to be here. First of all, I think the fact that these companies have gotten so big and so powerful, and now they're putting their thumbs on the scale to discriminate against conservatives and libertarians. Michelle was just talking about some of it. The fact that these Facebook, Twitter, Google are pushing a left-wing social agenda while marshaling their market power to shut conservative voices out of the marketplace, that's a huge, huge problem. In the meantime, they're also taking from us our private, personal, confidential information. They're not asking us. They're not telling us. They're turning around and selling it to make money off of us. So you put those 2 things together, I think we've got a big problem.
Censorship and privacy concerns.
Absolutely.
Okay, so in Washington, as a legislator, I mean, what do we do about that? Especially because, look, as conservatives, we don't necessarily want lots of new laws. We don't want alphabet soup agencies out there with whole new controls. So how do you balance that? What do you go about doing about this?
Well, I think one of the things we should think about is the sweetheart deal that big tech has gotten from government. I mean, big tech hasn't gotten so big and so powerful just on its own. It's gotten a whole bunch of sweetheart deals from government, none more so than Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which says that big tech is not subject to the same rules as other media companies and media providers, including, for instance, the platform you work for, Kim. I mean, you're subject to correct, publishers. You're subject to a different set of rules than big tech is. And big tech has used that in order to, in many instances, discriminate against conservatives and libertarians, but yet avoid the consequences of it. So I think we need to look at this cozy relationship between big tech and big government, because that's gotten us a lot of the way, or far along the way where we are now.
So just push back on that a little bit. I think that's a very legitimate question. But then there are libertarians, some conservatives out there who say, in fact, if you go and you take away and change CDA 230, that what you're in fact doing is you're going to give those people, if you impose liability on them for anything that anybody says there, and now they are liable for that, it's just going to cause them to crack down even more. That they're going to go after even more conservative voices, and they'll say, look, we're under law now liable for anything that comes out on our websites, and so we're just following the law, protecting ourselves.
Here's the thing I would say. I think it's time that we told these tech companies, if you're going to get these kind of deals, you can't engage in what we in the law, and I'm a lawyer by trade, my background is in the practice of constitutional law, and in the law we have a familiar phrase for this. It's called viewpoint discrimination. So we ought to tell them, you cannot engage in viewpoint discrimination. You cannot go discriminate against conservatives because they're conservatives. You can't go discriminate against libertarians because they're libertarians. You want to stop people from committing crimes on your platforms? That's great. You want to stop people from advocating violence on their platforms? That's great. That's not constitutionally protected speech anyway. But if you want to edit constitutionally protected speech, if you want to target conservatives and libertarians, you're going to be on the hook for that.
So what do? You get rid of CDA 230? You change it? What do you do?
Yeah, you can change it. I think we should have a look at all ought to be on the table. I think we should consider amending Section 230 to prohibit this kind of discrimination, this viewpoint discrimination. The goal here, Kim, is not to get less speech. The goal is to get more speech. The goal is to end the sweetheart relationship between government and tech, not to get government more involved. Because government has given tech this special status, that's why we are where we are. And we should talk about privacy, too, because the tech companies have a lot to answer for on that.
We're going to go on privacy. One last question on this, though. For those who would say, look, they're private companies. Now, I've had some people give examples to me. They talk about, go back to the early broadcast days. You had 3 broadcast stations, right? And people complained even then. All of the voices on it, liberal, liberal, liberal. Until one guy came along and he realized half the marketplace wasn't getting addressed, and you got Fox News, which now takes, a huge market share. So is that maybe the alternate scenario to changing the law, is just getting some competition?
Well, listen, I mean, the problem right now is that these companies are preventing competition in the market because they collect so much data and information from us. This is where the privacy angle merges into the speech angle. Because they collect so much information from us that they have, that we don't control, they now control it. Other companies can't effectively get access to it. They keep competitors out of the market. But let's be clear on this. These tech companies haven't gotten as huge and as powerful as they have just on their own. They haven't gotten this way without government intervention. It's because government gave them these deals that they've got now. And that's why I'm saying, look, it is time that they are held to the same standards as everybody else. Google and Facebook should not be a law unto themselves. They should not be able to discriminate against conservatives. They should not be able to tell us that we have to sit down and shut up. That's my point.
Okay. So, privacy.
Yeah.
It's pretty clear, given, I mean, you have to give them credit. These social media platforms have accomplished the rare thing of making everybody in Washington mad at them, right? For different reasons, but good on them. Anyway, there's going to be some sort of privacy legislation, one way or the other. What should it look like from a conservative perspective?
Well, I mean, I think ultimately here's where we need to go, Kim. Ultimately, we need to give people control of their own information. We conservatives believe in property rights. I sure as heck believe in property rights. And your information, your personal confidential data, it ought to belong to you. You ought to have a property right in that. Your information shouldn't belong to the big tech companies. So I think it's time that we made clear in our law that private citizens, individual citizens, have a property right in their own information. And if they want to get it back from big tech, they should be able to get it back. If they want to prevent their children, I mean, let's start with children. Think about, I've got 2 little boys at home. I'm terrified, not just of what my boys will see online as they're growing up, but the information that belongs to them that these companies are going to take. These companies are going to build profiles on my kids.
Surveillance capitalism.
Exactly. They're going to use it to target my children. And by the time my kids are my age, I mean, these companies will know about them, more about them than they know about themselves. We need to stop this. That information needs to belong to the individual consumers. I'd say, let's start with kids. I mean, we should all be able to agree on that. Let's stop this data collection on kids. Let's give parents the right to get that information back from the companies, delete these profiles on children, and then let's build from there.
What do you say to those, and I'm among these that do worry about this, is that in this rush to do something in this arena where we're concerned about what people are saying and what they're taking, that in fact we are giving too much power, and Democrats certainly see it this way. Every time they talk about legislation to deal with this, it is their opportunity to put Congress, the government, in control of what people can say, new campaign finance laws, all of this. How do we guard against that? How do we make sure we don't end up in a situation here where, in attempting to deal with these social media platforms, we violate the First Amendment and free speech rights?
It's a great question. I think the answer is we've got to make sure that we get more speech at the end of the day, not less. And my big problem, to go back to our first topic, my big problem with these big tech companies is that they're using their big power in order to squelch speech. So what do? We need to end the sweetheart relationship between government and tech. I mean, that's less government, not more. We need to open up competition so that there'd be more voices, not fewer. And giving people property rights, I mean, that is the basis of our whole economic system. And that's the basis of what we believe in the free market. Your property belongs to you, not to government. Your property belongs to you, not to these tech companies who take it from you without paying you for it. That's what needs to stop. I think it's a very conservative approach. So, you know, look, I'm not a fan of massive regulations. I'm not a fan of turning this over to agencies, creating whole bunches of new agency powers. What we need to do is enforce our law, give people clear property rights, and make these tech companies, make them obey the law. I mean, they shouldn't be above the law. They should have to follow the law. Let's start there.
So, unfortunately, we were supposed to have Megan Hilren, the Assistant Attorney General from the Department of Justice for Antitrust here, and he couldn't make it. But, you know, he's given a lot of speeches. I think his view is, for instance, that, yes, these companies are big, but they're not necessarily monopolies. They certainly have not given any actions or taken any actions at DOJ against them. Do you agree with that view?
He might want to check with his new boss on that. I noticed that Bill Barr said, now this is a big deal. Bill Barr, who I think, by the way, is going to be a fabulous Attorney General. It's going to be fantastic. Great choice by the President. Somebody who agrees with the President's agenda. But Bill Barr said in his confirmation hearings, he and I talked about this, and he said, I am particularly worried about the concentration of power in Silicon Valley. And here's what this comes down to at the end of the day. Do we want to have a country that is basically run from Silicon Valley? Do we want to have an economy that is run from Silicon Valley? Do we want to have politics that are run from Silicon Valley? Because that's the big fight of our time. So we need to enforce the law. We need to protect property. We need to encourage more speech.
Well, on those rallying final words, thank you, Senator. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. Thank you.